Dystopia warning, obviously. I've got a little question for you. Are you ready for the general election 2024? You better be, because it's happening tomorrow. Tomorrow! Finally, after 14 years of hell, we have the historic opportunity of a lifetime to not just get them out, but to put them in third place. Yeah. We could make, through tactical voting, the Lib Dems the official opposition and relegate them to shouting from the sidelines. We've come a long, long way together, haven't we? Through the hard times and the harder times. And I do have to celebrate you, yeah, because if you're watching this, you've survived the posh purge. Did their best to kill us, didn't they? In every which way. Austerity, COVID, cuts to mental health, and NHS in crisis, buildings falling down. So if you made it, I mean this, well done. And tomorrow I will be thinking of those that didn't, thanks to them. I mean, their campaign started absolutely terribly, didn't it? Sunak standing there in the pissing down rain with D-Ream blasting out. And that was a high point. That was as good as it got for them. It's been a slow, agonising, humiliating end. And I've drank in every single moment of it because that's what they deserve. In fact, what they deserve is prison. It's been a slow, humiliating loss of power, but not in the way that they normally pay for in high-end Soho brothels, but literal, loss of money, loss of resources, the ability to not make our laws whilst jacked up on GAC, The Conservative Party, one of the oldest political institutions in Britain, toppled by a backy-stained con artist, a monorail salesman, plus their own, greed, corruption, criminality, immorality, and private school bred sense of entitlement. Wow. All the polls are indicating that that's going to come to an end very soon. Now, I've got to start with some really, really important information. Many thousands of people still have not received their postal vote. Royal Mail is saying there's no backlog on their end, and the Tories are blaming Royal Mail, which makes a change from them blaming sub-postmasters and jailing them, doesn't it? Now, whether or not this is deliberate voter suppression is up to you. Some people are saying, it could just be, negligence. Just negligence, like the negligence in the NHS at the moment, which is resulting in 500 excess deaths per week. The reason I think that this is voter suppression is firstly because of voter ID, which is disenfranchising millions of people and putting a barrier in their way to voting. But also because the Tories have got form. In the local elections, they were getting people to send their postal vote applications to CCHQ, Conservative Campaign Headquarters. That was the return address they were putting on the envelopes. And why were they doing it? Because there had been talk of there being an increased demand for postal votes because people were having to be forced to use ID, despite there being barely any cases of electoral fraud in British history, actually. It's vote rigging. It's also estimated that up to 1 million people tomorrow will be disenfranchised by the voter ID scheme at least. Largely disabled people and people of colour. Yeah, because the government haven't done enough to stick the boot into those communities, have they? There is a way around it. You can apply for an emergency proxy vote until 5 p.m. tomorrow. You just have to call your council and someone that you know can vote on your behalf. If you have received your postal vote but it's too late to send it off, you can take it into the polling station and you can use it to vote. Although obviously that's not going to be easy for people that can't get to a polling station, and that's why they asked for a postal vote in the first place. Don't let those cheating fuckers take away your right to have your say tomorrow. This is why you don't vote Reform or Conservative. This is why you don't fall for someone that can give a good speech. This is why you don't vote based on charisma. Because these people are using your head to stamp on to get to higher office and higher power for profit, for personal gain. And when they get there, your rights will be stolen from you. Anyway, want a bit of cheerier news? The last Sky and YouGov poll has been released before the general election, and safe to say that Labour's on course for a pretty good majority. 212 seats, in fact. The biggest for any single party since 1832. But it's so important to not be complacent. If everybody thinks, oh, well, Labour are a shoo-in here, I'm not going to bother voting for them, I'm going to vote for this little independent that hasn't got a hope in hell, guess who wins? Now, I know some people have legitimate concerns about Labour, but for the love of Christ, it's them or the National Front. The National Front, who has the BNP, Reform, hot on their tail. And if you think that either of them are going to care about the rights of marginalised people rather than use them as footballs to deflect from their crimes, then they're insane, frankly. Now is not the time to fuck about. I understand why people want to vote Green, but they can only win in about 5 constituencies under first past the post. You know, you've got to take into account the limitations of our voting system, a voting system that favours them. Talking of reform, one of their candidates, Georgie David, has stepped down and defected to the Tories because of the racism and misogyny. Yeah, that must have been a proper shock to her. I mean, who would have thought that would happen in the party that's mopping up the BNP vote? I had a similar experience when I joined the Getting Bummed by Squirrels party. Guess what happened? Yeah, I got bummed by a squirrel, didn't I? Didn't even see it coming. Well, I wouldn't, would I, because they're tiny. Anyway, Led by Donkeys gave me one of my favourite moments in the campaign this week when they slightly hijacked a Reform hate rally. This is what happened.
Don't matter. All they're being told are the bad things that we did in our history. And I'm standing up and saying, enough. We should be proud of who we are, where we come from. Who put that up there?
Do you want to know my favourite bit about that? It isn't just the fact that it slowly unravels, much like Nigel Farage's campaign, but it's the fact that they struggle to get it down from the ceiling. But that's because most Reform voters can't raise their hands above, waist level because their knuckles are continuously dragging on the floor. Seriously, it's like you can smell their rallies, They all look like extras from the music video for Vanda. So the Tories have been massively spooked by Reform, haven't they? So in a final act of desperation, guess what they did? They resurrected that old Vanda hair. A man that both figuratively and literally fucked the entire country. Yeah, real vote winner that. The moment the nation saw who he really was, there was no going back. And what was he? A corrupt, selfish liar. The man that failed to attend 5 Cobra meetings at the height of COVID because he was writing a book. A man who decorated number 10 to look like a Turkish knocking shop. A man that, yes, as I've said, I had to stop referring to as Fred Westminster because it was offensive to Fred West. I think I speak for most of the country when I say get In other news, Bad Enoch and Braverman are starting to put in their applications to run as leader after they've taken their pasting tomorrow. But one person that I did not expect to throw their hat into the ring was Victoria Atkins. I had to look up what she did, apparently health secretary. Hard to tell, isn't it, because we've had about 70. I've seen her speak. She has the energy of a supply teacher that none of the class respects or listens to. And she also looks like she brushes her hair with a toffee apple. Mind you, it worked for that absolute helmet, didn't it? In other news, Sunak went on this morning and looked like the guy that sits in the corner of the orgy and watches his wife get railed by a bunch of other lads. Quite a fitting metaphor, really, for his time as Prime Minister. And Reform, well, say what you like about them, hear me out, but I had absolutely no idea that they were capable of bringing people back from the dead, but apparently they can. Yeah, Reform bots are circulating pictures of dead elderly people claiming that they're going to be voting Reform at the general election, including an older lady who died of a broken heart after getting burgled, because this is the level of scumbag that we're dealing with here. And another newsworthy development today is that the Sun has turned to Labour for the first time since 2005. I mean, the sun can get nice and deep in the sea. Murdoch's not someone that I would piss on if they were on fire. The thing that I'm taking joy from in this is that it's not so much a nail in the coffin for the Tories, but it's taking the coffin and kicking it off a cliff. Something that I hope will happen when Johnson, eventually goes. And finally, it's been a long 4 years being immersed in the pit of despair that is British politics. I don't intend to stop making content or talking about politics once this election is over. But I can assure you, as someone that's seen some of the most horrific stuff you can ever imagine, some of which I couldn't tell you about because I would get sued or bumped off probably. But let me assure you that they are monsters. The Conservative Party are monsters. They've robbed our taxpayers' money. They've driven our country into the ground. They have destroyed us financially, emotionally, mentally, physically for 14 long years. And they have got away with it because of their friends in the client media who are more than happy to perpetuate their bullshit and their lies. I want press reform. I want Leveson too. I want voter reform. I want a lot of things from the next government. But my main priority tomorrow is getting rid of the threat and the emergency. And they are the threat and the emergency. If they stay in, they're going to be even more influenced by Farage. If they go, we have a real shot at getting rid of populism. The last people on earth that are anti-establishment are the Conservative Party or Reform. Being a good public speaker does not make you a good leader. It makes you a good salesman. And people need to think very, very, very carefully about what's being sold to them and why. So tomorrow, remember your voter ID. Remember to vote tactically. And remember what they have done to us for 14 years. Destroy them. And I will see you on the other side. Never before has so much been at stake. Don't throw away your opportunity to be a part of this.